So in this video, I'm going to show you how I made that tiny skinny corner cabinet, as well as I'm going to start on this cluster of cabinets around the refrigerator. I'm focusing on the cabinet above the fridge, as well as that upper cabinet, which is part of a coffee bar in this video. My process in real life was a little tweaky because this green wall and this white wall in the photo are not the same depth. It was something I didn't pick up on while I was in the space, which was my fault. So I had to change my plans a little bit. So the cabinets I wanted to start, which was finish all the base cabinets, I kind of had to change my plan. And that is why I started on the uppers and that tiny side cabinet. So just like all the other videos, I'm starting out with my rough pieces. They're all the same size as the original base cabinets I showed the last 2 weeks. These are the measurements of my pieces. The nice thing about kitchens, I keep saying it, they're all these base cabinets except for the island that's different are going to be the same height, depth. The only thing that changes is the width. So this video is going to be a little bit faster because a lot of the processes I'm showing this I showed in depth for the first 2 videos of this series. But basically, like I've been saying, I like to do all my joinery with rabbets and dados, and I make an integrated spline, which is how I attach my face frames. Those are all the joints I'm showing you for my side panels right now. It's a little bit easier to see it and then see the cuts. But the only difference on this one is this bottom cabinet is going to have a fixed middle shelf. I talked to the customer beforehand. I always recommend at least one fixed shelf on furniture, especially bigger pieces. I know people think plywood's flat, but especially when you have pieces that are longer or taller, that plywood is going to bow. And if you have all movable cabinets and you don't have a really thick face frame, you can run into problems with inset doors where your boxes are will appear square, but the sides are bowed or cupped. It could cause problems with fitting the doors. So that is why I always recommend on cabinetry to have at least one fixed panel and then some movables above or below that. So same process as I've been talking about this whole time. I'm going to rip all of my pieces down to my width on the table saw. Then I'm going to cut them down to height on the radial arm saw. I could put my dado stack in my saw, and I could cut my bottom rabbet and my top rabbet. Now on the bottom cabinets, those rabbets are flush against the fence so that there's no pieces hanging out on the bottom, because I'm going to be putting a detachable toe kick on there, and because the countertop is going to be sitting directly on the top of these cabinets. So those are those cuts for that tiny side shelf. You can see how the 1/2 inch backer fits in there. And then for any shelves, all I'm doing is I'm going to mark where that shelf is. I'm going to send one of my pieces through with my front facing forward, one of my pieces through with my back facing forward. It might not make sense to do that if you don't make cabinets, but if you send them through with both of your faces facing forward, you'll have 2 identical parts, which means if your middle is marked off by even 1/8 of an inch, when you swing one of those side panels around, it means it will be off by 1/8 of an inch. By flipping your panels as you send them through, it actually orients that center perfectly and they align perfectly. And then once again, I could go through, all this work is being done with a dado stack. All I'm doing is moving the fence, and I could put that integrated spline on the front. I'm going through this pretty quickly because, like I said, the first 2 videos I did this more in depth. I don't want to get too repetitive for people that might watch the series as a whole. It's the same processes. And then I could go through and just cut the widths for my shelves. That's the nice thing about kitchens. I've been saying it and I'll say it again. The cabinet basis is pretty similar. What changes is going to be the internal components. So for this cabinet, my sides, I made the exactly the same as I did all of my other 3 base cabinets. The width is just different. So this one's roughly 12 inches wide. I have to count for the thickness of my dado, which is 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to subtract 3/4 of an inch for the 2 sides off of my final measurement. I could cut the width of my shelves to 11 1/4. Put that integrated spline on the front, and then when everything goes together, it will be exactly 12 inches. So if you had a bigger space, you essentially could cut all of the pieces for your base cabinets as at one point, not make them in a set of series like I am, and really pump this out quicker. Because you could see all the setup for all these parts does take some time, and doing all of your pieces at one part would be faster. Then to put these together, it's the same as the other base cabinets. Smaller cabinets, are, in my opinion, are always a little bit easier. I pre-drill all of my holes through the inside so that it perfectly marks up where my dados are. That's super important, especially for middle shelves, so you're not guessing where it's going. And then I went through this pretty thoroughly last week, so I'm not going to show how I made it, but basically my toe kicks, like I said, are detachable, so I attach those at the end. And then once I have those on, I could also make my face frame, which I'll show a little later in the video how I did that. But that is going to be the skinny cabinet. Pretty simple. I made this one with the door on it, which I didn't film in about a day. So then for the coffee bar cabinet and the fridge cabinet, the design starts changing. They're not traditional sizes for upper cabinets, but I'm going to build them the same way. And you can see for my shelves, I'm not going right off the bottom. I'm sheeting up from the bottom a little bit. That is just so at the ceiling you have some room to add molding, and on the underside of the bottom sometimes people put recessed lighting or whatnot down there, and that will hide it. So if you want to put thick lights down there, just calculate for that thickness and make those bottom shelves come up even higher if you need them to. But it's the same process. I have my rough sides. This cabinet's about 16 inches deep because it has to come to the front face of that brick wall. So it's going to be deeper than the other cabinets I make in the kitchen because, like I said, that green wall is a different depth than the other side of the room. But all I did was make my parts, which were about, like I said, 16 inches by about 48 inches tall, are the uppers in this kitchen. And then it's the same components. The middle portion for the shelf, this one will also have movable shelves. The 1/2 inch for the backer, which I think is really important for uppers because they have to hold all that strength on the wall. You want that 1/2 inch. And then the integrated tongue. Now for the cabinet above the fridge, it was the same thing. This one is basically, I calculated the depth of the fridge. I subtracted about 4 inches because you have to calculate for the swing of the doors to be able to open. So this cabinet is going to be in line with the surround around the fridge. It's about 4 inches less than the depth of the fridge. And this one's super simple. It's basically just a box. It's an awkward box. It's awkward to set up because it's really wide, and in the space it's heavy and you have to lift it all the way up. But building this was probably the easiest cabinet. So those two sides are 24 inches tall by 30 inches deep, and then the width just matches basically the width of the fridge, which I don't remember off the top of my head. And I gave myself about, I think, 3/4 of an inch breathing room on either side. So that one was pretty straightforward. And then once I had the coffee bar sides done, like I said in the beginning, I'll cut everything down to size because it's easier to rip all your pieces one size in the beginning, cut them down to size. And then this is just cutting a couple of the movable shelves. So this one will have 3 shelves, 2 of them movable. And then I could glue this one together as well. You could see at this point I bought a cheap blade to do this project, which was not the most intelligent thing to do. A lot of the tear out is hidden in the dados, but the rest of it I was able to cheat against the back of the wall, and it wasn't that big of an issue. One of the other reasons I always put backers on my cabinets is you can see how the backer will help you shift and align the cabinet into square, because if you cut your backer the exact same height of your cabinet, you could see how I could shift it with my hand and get everything lined up. I always still check for square, but on projects especially that have inset doors, starting off with as square of a piece as possible is just going to save you so much time. So then if you watch the first 2 videos in this series, you know I cut a bunch of poplar down to 2 inches thick and a bunch of poplar down to 1 3/4 inches because that are the sizes I'm using for my face frame. I can mark where that spline needs to be cut on those pieces, so you can see the stiles are already on this cabinet. I'm adding the upper rails, and then the nice thing about it is that groove fits right on that integrated spline. I could pop it in place with some glue and some brads and everything will hold. The integrated spline is nice because you could see for this bottom part, which is 1 3/4 inches, I could just put 2 little tick marks on where that spline is on my poplar piece. I have a 1/4 inch dado stack in the table saw. I can cut that groove and then it's just gonna line up perfectly. So you can pre-cut all your pieces to the size of your rails and stiles, and then all you're changing is where that groove is going to hit those pieces and kind of pump out all of your face frames. So I did the coffee bar the exact same way. It's the same thickness stiles. You could only see the main difference is that inner shelf, I did edge banding and it's cheated back so the inset doors can close. It's about 3/4 of an inch shallower. And then to do shelf pins, all I use is pegboard. These are 1/4 inch shelf pins. Make sure you know the size of your shelf pins because there's a couple different sizes. And I just drill the holes with pegboard, and then that's how I do the shelves. For the panels next to the fridge, same principle as the upper cabinet, which I already know the depth of. This is going to match the front of that, and basically the depth of it was decided on the depth of the fridge and how much clearance I needed for the doors to open. So I think this was roughly about 30 inches, these panels. Now this one, I'm also using the same principle of how I'm attaching the face frame to it, but it's a little bit more difficult to send these 30-inch by 8-foot wide, 8-foot tall panels on edge through the table saw, so I decided to use a removable spline in these. So I'm going to route a groove on the front edge of my panel and my poplar, and then there will be a 1/4 inch spline in the middle. It's the same principle, just a different way to do it. These ones are going to be painted, so I had to go through and remove the finish off of them so that the paint will stick to them, because this is pre-finished plywood I'm using. Those are the grooves on my side panels. Most of the construction of these happened on site, and some people opt to make them a little bit thicker. We stuck with 3/4 of an inch just because we were running out of space, logistically speaking, with how wide the fridge was and how wide other cabinets had to be on that bottom run before we would hit a light switch. So that is why they're so thin. I could route the identical groove on that poplar, and you can kind of see how that's fit into place. This is just a cheater vision of what those cabinets look like in the space. And then next week I will be tackling those 2 bottom cabinets, show you how I dealt with the depth changes in the wall.